Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 13 of the Rickenbacker 620 12 string build, and in this episode it's time for a bit more work on that fretboard. Okay, so we got the slots put in this board on the last episode, and in this episode we're going to go about getting the radius on for a start, and then we might get a chance to do some other work on it as we go along. Now, you might be wondering why put the slots in before we do the radius. For me, it's just a personal thing. I find it easier to do it that way. I understand that we are going to lose some of the slots on the outer edges of this board, and we might even lose some of the slots from the bit that's going to remain once we actually cut it down to size, because obviously this is way too fat at the moment. It's not a huge problem. What I can do once we get to that stage is I'll just set my stop up on my fret slotting saw and just go back over them again just to reinstate those slots as they should be. Like I say, it's a personal choice for me. There are other ways of doing it, but this is the way I'm comfortable with. So the first thing I'll do is I'll get this template cleaned up, get it out of the way, and then we'll attach the fretboard to the bench in a nice flat spot and start to plane in that radius. Okay, so that's the radius kind of roughed in now. I've lost a few of the slots up the top end. So they will need putting back in. But I actually want to try something before I go too much further with this. And that is to see if I can inlay some of this perloid material into this rosewood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off the bench and I'm going to kind of cut off a little bit of this excess. I'm going to make a kind of replica inlay from the rest of this material and just see how well it will go into here, whether it will bend around the radius, how easy it is to sand, what I can use to stick it in, etc. Because realistically, I don't want to go too far and then suddenly run into a load of problems. So I just much rather get it out of the way before I go any further. So there's my little bit of rosewood cut, and there's my kind of temporary little marker. I suppose we should put it that way. Now the first thing I want to do is just test and see how well we can actually stick this on to the rosewood with a bit of super glue, because that's how I intend to hold them on. But for the time being, I just want to temporarily attach it while I mark it up for inlay. So I'll just put 3 dots there, bit of magic juice, and that seems to have got it. So with it stuck on, we can now take our nice sharp scalpel and just mark where we want it to go. And we want quite a nice deep line for doing this. And the way to do it is start off with a couple of light strokes, and then as you establish that line, go a little bit harder. Now these scalpel blades are a little bit too flexible to a certain extent for this job, but you also want something quite thin so you're getting close to your inlay. So with that marked, next trick is to get that off again, and I'm hoping that we can flick this off with the scalpel. Like that. And that is encouraging, because as you can see, it has actually adhered quite well. And I haven't even kind of roughed the back of this inlay up any. So I'm pretty confident that if I kind of rough that up with some relatively rough sandpaper, that glue is going to stick an awful lot better. And if I put enough glue in to cover the whole of the back of it, I can't see that coming out in a hurry. So far, so good. So next up, we need to remove this waste material. Now, I think for these, my best option isn't going to be a power tool. So we're going to need something slightly different. And I think what we're going to be best to use is little tiny hand routers. And I think in particular this one, which might look like a toy, but it is actually a very useful little tool. And I can quite easily set this up once we get into this a little bit to cut no deeper than this material, and we should get a perfect inlay. But before I do that, I just want to kind of cut these lines in a little bit with a saw, just so they're down to roughly the right depth, and then we can get the hand router on and get them cleaned out. Okay, so that's all routed out now, and it's just ever so slightly proud, which is what I want. I want to be able to stick this in and then kind of flush it down to make it absolutely perfect. So I think when we get to the real thing on these, I'm going to use some black star bombs just so that it fills up any gaps that there might be. But as this is just a kind of proof of concept, I'll just use some ordinary super glue. So just give that a minute to dry off properly, and we'll get a block and some sandpaper on that and get it flushed down. Okay, so there's that little sample done. You might just be able to see there, it's come up really, really nice and glossy. Now what I did there was I started with some 100 grit and I worked my way through to 400 grit on those little sanding pads. Then I went up to 600, 800 and 1200 super acrylics before going to a 3000 and a 6000 Trizac pad. And that's really kind of brought that mother-in-law of pearl up beautifully. Now I'm not sure if it's always the case, but I know that a lot of Rickenbackers actually have a lacquered rosewood fingerboard. I'm not sure that's something I want to do. I generally prefer unlacquered necks, and I'm not sure I'd get on with a lacquered rosewood one, mainly for the aesthetics. But I think that shows that we don't actually need to lacquer it anyway, because that has come up really, really nicely. So I think in terms of a test, that's worked really well. There is a little tiny bit of an edge along there, and I think that is mainly because there's not enough glue actually in there. Where there is glue, it looks brilliant, but the glue's just a tiny little bit low in some points. I'm not actually sure that I will use black super glue when I do these, because where it's worked here, I don't think there's any need for it. It seems to just look really nice. So that has definitely been a worthwhile experiment, and I think a whole row of them, bearing in mind that they'll be a lot narrower than this, is going to look absolutely spot on. So Next up, having done that, it's time to get this board back on the bench and just reinstate these fret slots, getting it kind of cut more to shape so we can actually start putting the inlays into it. But I'm going to save that till the next episode. So as always, hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe, etc. And I will see you in a couple of days' time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.